his life with Emily, free of the imminent fear of violence. The trauma had taken its toll on both the father and daughter. They had endured unthinkable hardships, yet they emerged with fresh strength and knowledge. Adversity had tested their relationship, and it had been reforged. John and Emily began rebuilding their lives, focusing on healing and progress. The wounds of the past would never fade, but they had confronted the darkness together and emerged with a better future. They sought consolation in each other's presence and strived to build a life that reflected their perseverance and optimism for a brighter tomorrow. The final fight had been more than merely a struggle against external dangers. The path had been one of rediscovery and atonement. John and Emily had recovered their lives from the shadows of the past, and they were resolved to face the future with courage and hope. The path ahead was unknown, but they faced it together, bound by their mutual strength and unbreakable friendship. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, John felt a fresh sense of purpose. His kid needed his support and affection, and he was determined to give her both. "Let us start by getting you situated," John remarked, straightening up. "You're safe here now, we will work things out together. You are not alone." As they began to talk about the next steps, John realized their adventure was far from ended. The shadows of the past lingered, but they had the opportunity to carve a fresh route forward. The wounds of betrayal and the repercussions of previous grudges would need to be handled, but the link between father and daughter was a glimmer of hope in the midst of gloom. John's choice to take Emily marked the start of a new chapter in their lives, one that would test their strength and question their notion of family, forgiveness and redemption. They had both gone through unspeakable hardships, but together they would confront the ghosts of their past and work to create a future free of the shadows of their old lives. Emily's sudden homecoming had irreversibly shattered John Parker's tranquil life. The discovery of her suffering, along with the lingering shadows of his past, had unleashed a tempest of emotions that John tried to manage. However, amid the chaos, one thing became evident. He had to safeguard his daughter while also confronting the vestiges of the evil world that had had such a profound influence on their life. In the weeks following Emily's arrival, John worked on giving her a sense of normalcy. He enrolled her in a nearby high school and began looking into counseling for her mental wounds. Their daily routine began to settle, but the weight of their common history hung over them. John took solace in minor successes. Hearing her discuss her future goals. These moments of connection were priceless, but they did little to alleviate the gravity of the threats that still loomed over them. Despite the placid demeanor, John was aware that Richard Evans' illicit network was far from dissolved. The consequences from Richard's incarceration has made his associates even more desperate and dangerous. Lisa's brief time in prison had done little to deter Richard's friends from pursuing vengeance or continuing their illegal operations. The tension in the air was evident, and John understood that safeguarding Emily required tackling these lingering dangers head-on. One evening, as John and Emily were having supper, the phone rang. John's pulse raced as he took it up and recognized the caller ID. It was Mark Turner, a private detective who had previously assisted him. Mark's voice, which was typically calm and collected, had an air of urgency. "John, we've got an issue," Mark stated. "I've been tracking Richard's associates, and it appears they're planning something big. I'm worried they're after you and Emily." The news struck John like a bolt of lightning. He had believed that by eliminating Richard from the equation, he would have gained some kind of protection, but the remainder of Richard's network remained a significant menace. "Are you certain about this?" John inquired, attempting to keep his voice calm. "Positive," Mark said. "I was able to gather and report on their activities. They're out for vengeance and have been tracking your movements. They're bound to act eventually." John's mind raced as he attempted to create a plan. He understood that addressing the attacker directly was perilous, but hiding was not an option. He had previously seen the disastrous consequences of avoiding difficulties. This time, he had to take a stand. "Okay, Mark, what would you advise we do?" John inquired, his voice unwavering. Mark's suggestion was realistic. "First, protect your house and ensure Emily's safety. I'll arrange for some of my contacts to provide protection for you. Meanwhile, let's go deeper into their intentions and see if we can get ahead of them." With Mark's plan in motion, John began reinforcing his house. He installed more protection measures and began keeping a low profile, avoiding any trends that may help burglars trace him down. Despite these safeguards, the stress remained unremitting. Every creak in the home and every passing automobile seemed like a possible threat. 1 week later, John and Emily were enjoying a nice evening at home when they heard a loud bang at the door. John's instincts were on alert. He looked through the peephole and noticed a familiar face. Mark Turner was nervous and disheveled. "John, we have a problem," Mark stated as John answered the door. "They're making a move tonight. We must flee immediately." Panic overtook John, but he pushed himself to stay cool. "What's happening?" "Their plot has been breached," Mark added, I have reason to believe they are coming for you right now, and they are not alone. We do not have much time. Grab everything you can, and let's go." John hastily packed a few items and ensured Emily was prepared to depart. He could see the anxiety in her eyes, but he gave her a comforting smile. "We'll be okay. Please stay with me." Mark brought them to a secure place, a safe house set up by his contacts. The location stood in sharp contrast to John's usual surroundings. A heavily fortified home on the outskirts of town, complete with monitoring and defense precautions. John and Emily settled in, but their sense of comfort was tempered by the fact that they were still in danger. As night fell, Mark's acquaintances remained attentive over the safe home. John, Emily, and Mark waited anxiously in quiet, their nerves frazzled by the situation's ambiguity. Hours passed, and every minute felt like an eternity. Near midnight, the sound of breaking glass broke the silence. The invaders had breached the perimeter. Mark's contacts jumped into action, resulting in a tense confrontation with the assailants. John and Emily gathered in a safe area, their hearts racing as they heard muted noises of conflict outside. John's thoughts raced as he attempted to remain calm for Emily's sake. He could hear the assailants' voices, their threats and demands, mixed with the noises of fighting. The safe house's security measures were functioning well, but it was evident that the situation was severe. After what seemed like hours, the noises of the conflict faded. Mark's contacts successfully repelled the assailants, but the nightmare was far from done. Mark entered the room, relieved yet somber. "They are currently gone." Mark's voice sounded exhausted. "But it's not over. We need to find out who is behind this and bring them to justice." John and Emily were shocked, but uninjured. The immediate threat was gone, but the events of the night highlighted the enormity of their predicament. John saw that their safety was in jeopardy, and that they needed to act quickly to put a stop to the threats that loomed over them. In the days that followed, Mark stepped up his inquiry into Richard's connections. With the assistance of law enforcement, they were able to locate key members of the criminal network and obtain evidence that led to their arrests. The endeavor was exhausting, but the breakthrough came when they discovered a critical piece of information connecting the surviving colleagues to a planned attack on the safe house. The last encounter was quick and decisive. Law enforcement initiated a series of raids based on the evidence acquired, dismantling the remaining components of Richard's network. The arrests were widely publicized, and criminal operations that had previously threatened John and Emily's life were exposed. Lisa's legal issues persisted. However, she had become a minor issue in comparison to the destruction of Richard's criminal business. John's attention moved to reconstructing. John Parker had always prided himself on living a balanced existence. At age 42, he had established a secure job as a civil engineer, attained some success, and provided a nice house for his family in a quiet suburban neighborhood. He was a guy who valued honesty and devotion, and he carried these beliefs into his marriage to Lisa, his high school sweetheart. Lisa Parker, 39, has been a dedicated wife and mother. She worked as a part-time graphic designer, juggling her profession and raising their only child, Emily. Emily, 16, was a bright and accomplished adolescent renowned for her love of music and her tight relationship with her parents. The Parkers appeared like the ideal family. They attended neighborhood activities, cooked barbecues, and went on family vacations together. John had always considered himself lucky to have a supportive girlfriend and a kid who brought joy into his life. But that all changed one fatal evening. It was a crisp, chilly night, the type that foreshadowed the coming winter. John had arrived home from work early, excited to surprise his family with a prepared meal. He brought the scent of his famous lasagne, made using a recipe passed down from his grandmother. As he reached the front door, he heard laughing from within the home. It was a pleasant sound, yet something about it made him stop. He was going to open the door when he heard an abrupt noise, a muted discourse, drew his interest. Curiosity, fueled by a sensation of something odd, drove him to put his ear against the door. At first, he could only make out incomprehensible babble, but then he recognized Emily's voice, which was filled with excitement. "Mum, your boyfriend Johnson is amazing. Thank you for sharing him with me. He invites you to join him the next time." The words struck John like a sledgehammer. His pulse was pounding fiercely, and he felt an ice shudder down his spine. He had always suspected Lisa's growing estrangement, but never expected such a betrayal. His thoughts raced as he attempted to digest what he had just heard. Emily had spoken, given him the opportunity to heal, but the scars of his past remained firmly embedded in his heart. John had moved to a tiny town distant from home, where he worked as an independent civil engineering consultant. He had managed to maintain some sense of normalcy, but the ghosts of his previous existence persisted, occasionally seeping into his mind. John's new existence was calm, in sharp contrast to the chaos he had left behind. The small-town environment was relaxing, providing a respite from the hectic pace of his prior life. He'd moved into a small home on the outskirts of town. when silence was more of a comfort than an emptiness. His days were filled with regularity, including working from home, socializing with new people on occasion, and seeking refuge in the seclusion of his surroundings. However, the sensation of unsolved concerns from his past continued to haunt him, manifesting as sleepless nights and fleeting flashbacks of brighter times. One bright fall afternoon, while going through a mound of documents in his study, John heard a tap at the door. It was unexpected because he seldom had guests. He answered the door to discover a young woman standing on his doorway, pallid and worried. Her skull had been shaved, and her eyes were sunken with a mix of dread and resignation. For a second, John didn't recognize her. "Dad," the woman said in a trembling voice. John's heart skipped a beat. He recognized her immediately as Emily, his daughter. The sight of her so changed from the vibrant teenager he had once known struck him with a mix of astonishment and great regret. "Emily," John said, his voice barely a whisper, "what happened to you?" Emily went into the home, hesitantly. She was noticeably terrified and shaking as she sat on a chair. John hurriedly got her a cup of tea, his hands shaking as he did so. He sat across from her, attempting to grasp the severity of the situation. "It is a long story." Emily's voice began to break. "I wasn't sure where else to go. I had to leave." John listened intently as Emily recounted the last 5 years of her life. After John's abrupt departure, Lisa had struggled to cope with the consequences of her actions. Her legal troubles, coupled with the fallout from Richard's arrest, had plunged the family into chaos. With her own prospects dwindling and her finances strained, Lisa was forced to make increasingly desperate choices. Emily, now a teenager grappling with the loss of her family's stability, found herself adrift. Her mother's involvement with Richard's criminal activities had isolated them from their community and friends. As Lisa's financial situation worsened, she fell deeper into Richard's remaining network of corrupt associates. The influence of these individuals loomed large over their lives, casting a dark shadow over Emily's adolescence. In the midst of the turmoil, Emily had tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She excelled academically and clung to her music as an escape from the chaos. But, as time passed, the pressure and the weight of her mother's decisions began to take a toll on her mental health. Lisa's erratic behavior and financial desperation led her to make a series of poor decisions, ultimately putting Emily in a dangerous position. Emily's voice grew softer as she spoke of a particularly harrowing period. "Mom got involved with some of Richard's old associates. They weren't just criminals, they were dangerous people. They threatened us. And when Mom couldn't pay them off, they took it out on me." John's heart sank as he listened to Emily's account of the abuse and manipulation she had endured. It became evident that Lisa's decisions had exposed Emily to a world of pain that no kid should ever face. The details were surprising and devastating. Emily had been subjected to psychological abuse and intimidation, and she had been pressured into events that left her emotionally scarred. Her mother, despite her best attempts to protect Emily, was unable to shelter her from the repercussions of her engagement in Richard's network. Emily continued to talk, revealing that her life had spiraled even deeper as she sought to flee the situation. She had successfully left her mother's house, but not without consequences. Her flight was a frantic act of self-preservation, which prompted her to seek safety in several locations, each time leaving as soon as she felt secure. The tattered garments were a tribute to the trauma she had been through. "I couldn't stay with Mum anymore," Emily said, tears streaming down her face. "She kept telling me it would get better, but things just got worse. I had to leave to survive. I didn't know if you'd even want to see me, but I had nowhere else to go." John's heart ached as he took in Emily's words. He had been so consumed by his own sense of betrayal and the quest for justice that "I didn't want this to happen," I thought. "I believed I was doing the right thing by leaving. I didn't realize how much you were suffering." Emily nodded, her expression a mix of relief and persistent anguish. "It's not your fault, Father. I only needed to find you. I wasn't sure what else to do." John grasped Emily's hand and gently held it. He saw the vulnerability in her eyes and realized that restoring their connection would be a difficult and delicate task, about her mother's partner with a level of intimacy that exceeded conventional acquaintance. The mention of Johnson suggested a more close connection, and the casual remark of Lisa joining in left little doubt. Stunned, John stepped back from the door, the lasagne sliding out of his grip and breaking on the doorstep. He stood there in amazement, as if the world had crumbled around him. He turned on his heel and walked away from the home without looking back. He needed room to ponder and breathe. His thoughts were a tumultuous whirlpool of betrayal, rage, and disbelief. John's departure was abrupt and unexplainable. He put a few items into a bag and left a letter that simply said, "I can't stay, I need time to work things out. Please respect my privacy." He did not say where he was going or when he may return. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, was now strangely silent. Lisa was perplexed and devastated for several days after John vanished. She looked for him, but he was nowhere to be found. Their friends and neighbors were likewise confused, and rumors spread about the unexpected and inexplicable departure. Emily remained mute, torn between her devotion to her parents and the guilt of her own conduct. Her adolescent bravado is withering under the weight of her shame. Meanwhile, John had retired to a tiny rented cottage in the woods, distant from the life he knew. He spent his days alone, attempting to cope with the shock and planned his next moves. The betrayal was so deep that it felt like it would never heal. He had always been a man of action, and he knew in his heart that merely walking away would not enough. To pursue justice, John hired a seasoned private detective named Mark Turner. Turner was regarded for his prudence and competence, and he rapidly became an indispensable ally. John's request was easy: find out the truth about Lisa's connection with her boss, Richard Evans, a wealthy and important businessman who had recently relocated to town. Turner's inquiry uncovered a frightening picture. Had a reputation for being both charming and cutthroat. His financial operations were frequently veiled in secrecy, and allegations of corruption followed him wherever he went. The investigator learned that Lisa and Richard's connection extended beyond infidelity. They were heavily involved in a web of corruption and illicit activity. Richard's influence permeated the whole town, and his dealings were anything but pure. John was shocked to discover that Lisa had not only deceived him, but also exposed Emily to this hazardous world. Lisa's relationship with Richard had endangered their kid, and the seriousness of the situation was overpowering. The discovery that Lisa had participated in Richard's unlawful actions was the ultimate blow. John felt deeply betrayed not just by his wife but by the entire world he had previously trusted. With Turner's assistance, John gathered proof of Richard's unlawful actions and Lisa's involvement in them. It was a tedious procedure, but the evidence was compelling. The ultimate blow came when John realized Lisa had exploited her access to Richard's resources to facilitate his illegal activities, incriminating herself in a variety of crimes. John's sense of justice and need for closure compelled him to act decisively. He presented law authorities with the information Turner had obtained, and Richard Evans and Lisa Parker were soon facing significant charges. The case received extensive notice in the media. John's name was hardly mentioned. His desire for vengeance had been successful, but the human cost was enormous. His family had been destroyed, and Emily was forced to negotiate an irreversibly transformed world. As Lisa and Richard fought their legal fights, John attempted to separate himself from the pandemonium. He needed to rebuild his life, free of the shadows of his past. The pain of betrayal was severe, but he believed that time would heal the scars. He had no idea that this was only the start of a new chapter in his life, one that would put his resilience to the test and reshape his perspective on family and forgiveness. 5 years had gone since John Parker's life was turned upside down by his wife, Lisa's treachery, and the discovery of her affair with Richard Evans. The passage of time had,